Here's an update on the Z06. I've got the torque tube getting ready to go back in. I've got the Mantic twin disc clutch installed and all aligned with the tool that I got. I'm in no short supply. Got a bunch of AN fittings, so 99% of this stuff is all Earls, so that's top quality. I don't use that Fragola crap because you always have just minor issues with it. So if you don't mind screwing with it, you can get the cheaper stuff, but you won't have any issues with Earls. Earls makes the best stuff. So I think one of these for the brake booster, I had to go with a Russell. But basically, we've got a Y, so this is going to split off into the fuel rails. I've got the caps installed on the intake manifold. I couldn't install the manifold because the way that the torque tube up there has to shift forward, it wouldn't leave any room for this intake, especially if it had fuel rails on it. Then up next, we got some LG coilovers to install with them. So, nice little set of instructions. So we're just doing coilovers on everything out here lately. I'm not sure who produces them, but these come in the kit, if anybody can read Chinese. But they look like a really nice unit. The whole shock body itself is threaded, so you can adjust the ride height without actually changing the tension on the springs. Of course you can. That would only affect it during like full droop, whether you had this compressed or not. But the benefit, it'll make sure your springs will never bind. So I guess it's you can set it up as kind of like a bump stop. I'm not sure if they have rubber bouncers in there. I don't think they do, but we can pop them off and take a look. But yeah, we got front and rear. So we've got a Nick Williams 102mm throttle body ready to go on it as well. We've got an ATI super dampener as well as a new set of hardened push rods. So the factory push rods are pretty thick. We're just going with some hardened heat treated chromoly push rods in the standard 5/16 size. So these turned out to be about 7.8 inches in length. So we're just at the factory specs for the factory heads. So for these cars, since the rocker arms are not adjustable, you actually have to get a pushrod length checker tool. So that's what we've got here. This is my own personal one. I wrap a little bit of tape around the end just so I can hold on to something while I'm adjusting this push rod. When you get rid of all the slack, you basically count, there's little grooves on it, and you can count how many turns it takes to get back to zero. There's some grooves on the top one. I'm not sure if you can see that, but there you go. Right there. So you can see some grooves on the push rod. You basically, as you spin this, you count the turns that it took to get to zero lash, and basically that'll tell you what the length of this is. You add it into the overall length. I wrote it on the install thing here just to be sure. 6.8 inches plus 50 thousandths per revolution. So they worked out at a nice 7.8 with the calibrated preload set in for the Howard forged lifters. So we'll get this worked on and get everything bolted up. Still waiting on an ARP bolt for the front end. So once I have that, then I'll be able to install the dampener as well as the steering rack. But I just got done dropping the fuel tank along with this clutch here, and I put a AEM high flow fuel pump in tank, so it's nice and quiet. I've tested it. You have to modify the bucket, so I actually put in about a gallon just to see if the pump bucket was still sucking in fuel, and it was. So I'm really happy with that. The new overall in-tank module is no longer spring loaded, so you have to do some custom cutting on this on a new rubber line install. But we're sitting right at the bottom. I was able to inspect it with my bore scan on my borescope camera, and everything looked great. Flashback a week. Still waiting on the ARP crank bolt, but as you can see, we've got the torque tube installed. The clutch is good, like we said. Fuel pump. I've even mocked up these Billy Boat exhaust. They have the vacuum valves right in the top. Basically, how that works is the vacuum is pulled on a valve that actually opens up these exhausts. You can see it right there. So as soon as you turn it on, that valve will shut, and it'll all run through the muffler and have more of a quiet sound to it, so that when you go wide open throttle, it'll flip that butterfly open. So it's nice. We've also got these coilovers installed on the rear. Shot these bolt heads with some clear coat because there's no rust protection on them. They're just oxide black. So got the sway bar mocked up, sitting in there. Got my links ready to go on that. They'll wait till it hits the ground. Got my bungee cord holding the exhaust right up by the trans just to hold it in place. We've got one header installed. Beautiful header, stainless works. So I didn't install the driver's side yet because I am going to have to remove my flywheel holding fixture that I made. So until I get that crank bolt inside this ARP dampener, you know, it's just not going to happen. So gonna hold off on that. Got the full length pads. We got rid of these padlet designs on these LS7 z06 calipers, also found on the Grand Sports as well. So I left the fronts out. I installed the upper adapters, but since this cradle's got to be dropped again in order for me to install the steering rack, I'm going to hold off on that. So let's get it down and I'll show you what we're working with. Alright, so here we have the intake still mocked up. Got all our fuel lines ran. We used a -8 180 to a -8 gauge port, as well as a -8 to quick disconnect. So if you want to disconnect the fuel lines, all you got to do is use a GM tool and pop that clip out, and you can just disconnect it very easily. So we're using the Earl's 350 nylon black braided -8 hose, and that runs all the way to the back, to the top, where it goes in at a 90 into a Y fitting. That Y fitting branches out, goes left, and loops up to these 90s, -8 90s. We've got a -8 plug in the front to clean it up, so you don't see a lot of fuel lines. The injectors you'll still be able to see, so they'll go in there. I am debating about these PCV lines here. So we might end up keeping this one because it's got the quick disconnect to the factory stuff. This runs to the evap solenoid on the passenger side here. So I'm going to relocate the evap valve down here. I'm going to get a extension for the evap harness to reach so I can do that. I still have to mount the map sensor under the manifold and supply it with vacuum. We've got 2 ports open in the front here. We've got 1 port open in the back. So we've got some vacuum ports to play with. We're actually 1 short, so 2 of those are going to tee off of each other. Now goes for the PCV system. So his original thought was to change out these valve covers for some, get the coil covers and just, block it up. But we are concerned they may not fit. It may take up a lot of space. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to do a coil relocation. We're going to tuck the coils somewhere around in here and somewhere around in there. Maybe we'll take the inner fender liners out and see if we can find a spot to mount them. And then we're getting the extensions to run basically up. I routed all the harness underneath this intake manifold. So this is how it will look, or very similar when it's all finalized. But all the wiring is inside underneath the manifold because it's kind of a rarity you get to do that. But with this manifold you can, because it has that big air gap under there. So I need some injector extensions, which it seems nobody makes, so we might have to do some custom ones. But they're EV6 style plugs. They fit EV14 injectors, which are supplied here. And they're going to run up, the plug's just going to run up and tee into the injector. I'm going to try to run the plugs on the inside to hide it even further. So you'll see the injectors, but that's pretty much all you'll see. Now, the valve covers, since we're doing a coil relocation, we're not going to stay with these stock covers. We're actually going to go with some Moroso billet covers. They're the 2.5 inch tall units, so they'll look really nice, and it'll match this intake. You know, it's just straight cut from billet. We may have them anodized black, and the customer wants to engrave a logo in the valve cover to kind of tie it all together. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Once we get those new covers, I may transfer all of these PCV hoses over into more AN fittings. So I'm not sure if I want to do a 90 at the back, although I would like to keep it higher up to keep it out of the oil splash. Obviously from the factory they went with these two pads here, and they just drill a hole and mount this this line. I could drill a hole and actually mount the same line, pull it out of this valve cover, and that way we can retain these quick clips, which will make removal of this setup easy. I do have to do the same thing on the driver's side over here, because this is also an evap line here. This takes in fresh air. You got one fresh air valve right there, and then another fresh air line right here. So you know, we're going to supply them with fresh air using probably NPT threads in the valve cover. So we're going to have to drill them, and then we can run -8 or I'm sorry, -6 hose, just like we have on the PCV valve. The reason I went with -6 is because the internal diameter of these hoses is very similar to the internal diameter on these -6 hoses. So I don't want to create a restriction, especially on a big 427. You got a lot of surface area in the rings. Some blow-by is bound to happen. You know, it happens with every engine. So we want to prepare for that and have nice crankcase ventilation. It's only going to be a performance upgrade for it. So we've got a larger inlet on the bottom of the manifold with a -6 hose running to the PCV line, and then the catch can right here. So that's normally just going to go right back into the intake manifold, and that system will be done. So stay tuned. It's going to be a little while. He's in no rush, so we're still waiting on some parts. He's waiting on the body kit as well, so we're in no rush to get this done. Might be sometime in July, but I would like to finish it up and hear this thing run. So stay tuned. We'll try to give you guys another update on this project at a very short time in the future, I guess. But I appreciate you guys watching. If you like the video, definitely leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe, and stay tuned for some more updates on the Z06 as well as other projects we got going on. So thanks for watching again, and I will see you next time.